love that everyone's so thrilled to be here. I love the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today is going to be so special, and it's a very necessary conversation, the art of the interview. But before we get into the fun, I'm Shari. I run Pipelines, which is a mobile app that connects underrepresented talent directly to jobs and training opportunities across tech, entertainment, and creative industries. Jessica has put all the information in the chat, how you can take the most advantage of our platform. It's totally free for students and talent to connect to these industries. And we have been so gracious to partner with the CSUEA for the last 2 years doing these events for you, the student and alum base, and for the public, just focused on different areas of entertainment so we can make sure that you're learning about the different opportunities and career paths available to you and how to connect, and also hearing from actual industry HR professionals and recruiters who are doing the work. I think that's the most important part. So before we get into the fun stuff, I do want to carve out time and kick it over to Dina so she can talk a little bit about the CSUEA. Take it away, Dina.
Good morning, Shari. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to Haley, my partner in crime at the CSUEA, who make all this magic happen. And a special thank you to all of our panelists taking time out of their really busy lives to give you guys some direct advice on how to kick ass at your next job interview. We are so grateful to all of our panelists, and for all of you who are here today. You could be doing something else. You've got class, you've got spring break partying to do, and yet you're here. So I am very grateful for you guys showing up, and I hope that you get some value out of our session today. The CSUEA is the Cal State Entertainment Alliance. We serve the 23 campuses of the Cal State system, and we are trying our best to make sure that our campuses are a pipeline of talent into the entertainment industry. I know that many of you come from diverse backgrounds. I know many of you might not have connections in the entertainment industry. I know that you all want to be part of it, and we want to help you get there. So I would just encourage everybody to follow us. I'm sure you already are if you're here at the CSUEA, and I went ahead and put a link to our website in the chat. So please check out our opportunities. We have mini grants if you want to invite folks to campus. We have housing opportunities for summer internships. We've got a lot of resources for you guys. We have a whole page of career resources, from creating and cleaning up your LinkedIn to your cover letter and your resume, all that good stuff. But there's nothing like hearing it directly from the professionals. So I am going to stop there, check out our socials and website, and I'm going to kick it back to Shari. Thank you.
I didn't even realize I was talking on mute. There we go. Thank you so much, Dina. So like I said before, if you've been following us and been involved in our previous panels, we do focus a lot on resumes, cover letters, and interviewing, which all of the above is important, right? It's like timeless information. But we really wanted to dedicate today specifically on the interview. So we have a great group of panelists here today, which I'm really excited for you to meet, and I'll have them introduce themselves. There will be a Q&A at the end. I will let you know when the Q&A is happening, so please do not drop your questions in the chat during the conversation because I will not get to them. I will let you know when we open the floor for questions towards the end. So if you do have questions, I would just jot them down for the end. So let's just get right into it. I would love the panelists just to, obviously, their name, their company, their role, the types of roles that you typically recruit for, and a little bit about the company where you work, just so they are familiar. Popcorn style.
All right, I'll just go first. Thanks, Shar, for kicking us off. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you or see you all on Zoom. My name is Vanessa Gonzalez, and I work at Disney. I've been with the company for a little over 6 years. It's funny, every time I mention that to people that I work at Disney, they immediately think I work in the theme parks, but Disney is obviously an enormous enterprise. It's comprised of a lot of different business divisions. So I don't work in the theme parks. I actually work in-house as part of the recruitment team. So I'm a manager of technology recruiting. What the heck does that mean? It means I manage a team of recruiters that specifically hire our engineers and our technologists across the company. And yeah, did I miss anything else, Shar? I'm sorry.
That was great. Thank you.
All right, I'll go next. My name's Andrea Andrews, and I am part of an independent recruiting company called BLT Recruiting. We have 10 recruiters now, and we recruit primarily in the advertising industry, but that encompasses anything from like ideation creative all the way through post. We also work in gaming and entertainment and broadcast entertainment, trailer companies. So pretty much anything from like creatives to producers to visual effects artists, editors, kind of everything. So we're like kind of a catch-all. We were a female-only company, and now we have 2 fine gentlemen also working with us, which is super exciting as we grow. And I don't know, the best part about my job is I love my job, and I think that's really important. I get up every morning and I'm like, hey, who am I going to meet today, and who am I going to introduce that person to? And hopefully it's going to be a match, and how exciting is that? So I totally love my job, and I'm super excited to be here.
I'll jump in. Hey everyone, my name is Hugo Vergara. I work at Aspect, and I'm the HR director there. And so Aspect is a marketing and advertising agency really focused on creating trailers, right? So a lot of our clients include studios across the industry. Prior to this role, I was doing talent acquisition at a studio. So similar to what Andrea mentioned, like my day really involved like meeting with candidates, learning about their experiences and the work that they've done. And the type of roles that I'm currently recruiting for are typically a range as well. Anything from a creative coordinator all the way to like director of music, producers. Yeah, so and I'll drop our website in the chat if anyone wants to check out the work that we're doing.
I'll jump in. I apologize in advance. I've lost my voice, so I sound like, I don't know, I've been gargling with gravel. But I'm Jimi Vaughn. I'm the VP of Diversity and Organizational Development at Company 3. So Company 3 is like one of the largest, I think, that do what we do. So we cover a lot of aspects of post-production. I think we got our claim to fame has really been color grading. So adjusting color and setting, using color theory to set moods and tones and convey story, in feature work and television and commercials and music videos and all of that. But we also do visual effects. We've got a number of brands under the Company 3 umbrella that kind of focus on like commercial visual effects and, episodic and feature. So we do a lot, and we're in a number of different countries, but although we have a lot of people that do remote work. So my areas of responsibility of the groups that report into me are our talent acquisitions team, our diversity, equity, and inclusion team, employee engagement, and talent acquisition. Like there's a lot of things. So the types of roles that we hire for, being as the company, like a company that's the size that we are, we hire for everything essentially, so from your artist roles, like colorists, like VFX artists, all of the different, kind of specialties within those spaces. We also have a significant number of like traditional roles like HR, finance, accounts payable, like things, the vault, like runners. We do a lot. So I would definitely say to check out our website at company3.com to see what jobs are available, because they run the gamut from entry level to senior artists and beyond. So I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you so much. And Andrea and Jimi, if you could drop your websites in the chat. And for everyone here, just save the chat at the end, because there are going to be a lot of resources dropped throughout the conversation. I want to make sure that you guys aren't just leaving with more information, but actual tangible resources that you can tap into. That's why we do this. And like Haley said, if you're feeling brave, turn on your camera. I love seeing these beautiful faces. I know it's Friday, I know we're ready for the weekend, but it's all good. We're all here. I love seeing these smiling faces. So let's make it a conversation. Okay, so let's jump right into it. So before I ask my first question, like I said before, I think interviewing, when I work with talent or people who are looking to break into the industry, interviewing can be very daunting. Even for the most outgoing people, it can still be very daunting. And that's why we really wanted to specialize this discussion on the art of interviewing. And that's not to say that there's any right or wrong way to interview, but the point of this discussion is to make sure that when you leave this conversation, you feel more confident. It's all about feeling confident, that you feel like you gave your best, that you were your most authentic self. And so we're going to dive right into that. And I tried to keep it as general as possible, because this is literally a topic we could talk about for like, this could be a week-long panel, if I can be honest. But I tried my best to think about what you want to know from the panelists here. And so that's what we're going to do. So very first and foremost, we're going to talk about preparation, because preparation is so important before we even talk about when you get to the company or when you log on to Zoom for that interview. I want to spend some time on preparation. So what specifically, because when you talk about preparation, it's so broad. So what specifically are the companies wanting you to know when you show up to the interview? What kinds of things should they be preparing? What tips do you have that they really should be doing the day before an interview?
I'm happy to jump in. I think what's most important is obviously know the company, do as much research as you can on the company, understand what they do. If you can, look at LinkedIn and find out, if you do know, if it's available to you, who you'll be speaking to, look at their background, see where they came from, because it's a conversation. It's not a one-way thing. It's a conversation that goes two ways. I feel like if the more prepared you are with what they do, and maybe even be prepared with something that you really moved you, or that you really liked about the company, or you liked about a piece of work, or you liked about, the diversity, or whatever it is that you find in your research that attracts you to the company, be prepared to talk about that so they know you're not just dialing it in. That's it.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Vanessa.
Thanks, sorry. To add to that, definitely agree to do your homework. Normally when you get an interview confirmation, you usually know the person that you're going to be speaking with. So find them on LinkedIn, see if you have any similarities. Maybe you guys, there's an alma mater or something about their profile that you can bring up to say, hey, I noticed. And then that can be a conversation starter too, because an interview doesn't have to feel so polished or so like, oh my gosh, I have to, I can't bring my authentic self to the table. Like sometimes it's really nice to have a little bit of an icebreaker to start the conversation with. I also say in terms of preparation, you never really know the types of questions that you're going to get, because, interview questions can vary, but I think it's really important for you guys to have a little bit of an elevator pitch. And what that means is know what you want to say about yourself, because there might be a question that is somewhere along the lines of, hey, tell me about yourself. Know your personal story. It can be a quick 20 seconds, 30 seconds, practice it in front of the mirror, talk about where you come from and where you are today and your career aspirations, your career journey, what you've studied in school, what you've majored in, what your interests and your passions are. Like really try to convey that in that initial setup of the tell me about yourself part of the interview.
Absolutely. To tag on to that, because I feel like that level of preparation is absolutely necessary. I think what we look for a lot of times is like, I want to know who I'm working with. I want to know like the personality of the individual. Is that person engaging? Is that person, well prepared? Like, are they confident when they come across? How do they communicate, essentially like with me? So when you actually prepare, it allows you to be a little bit more kind of, I guess, authentic, because I look at an interview as really just a purposeful conversation. Like it really is just a conversation between like you and another individual. And it's just like, but we just want to make sure that we stay on topic. But other than that, like don't put that, I guess, all of the weight of the world into the discussion, so that you can actually be confident and comfortable to show up, really as yourself. On a more like kind of logistics standpoint, and I think Andrea was saying exactly like kind of the same thing is, make sure if you get a confirmation of who you're meeting with, like just know who you're talking to. Before interviews, I used to always just kind of do a Word document of just like what the time was, just so I knew that I knew exactly what it was. I wasn't going to be late. I wasn't going to be way too early or anything like that. Who was I meeting with? Like, what was their name? If it's a name that might be a little bit hard to pronounce or something like that, I do like a quick search like online to see if like, do they have like a YouTube video or something out there where they say their name? Has anybody ever said who they are, especially if there's somebody that's like, decently high profile, so I can make sure that I got the name right or if I'm pronouncing it correctly. And I think, when you go in, just be ready to occupy kind of like that space also, because maybe you don't know how that name's pronounced, but there's nothing wrong with being like, I want to make sure that I get your name, like say, like pronounce your name correctly. Could you say like pronounce your name for me again? And then like, great, perfectly. But then remember to say it right the rest of the time. But it's whatever you need to do to just be prepared when you go in. I think preparation is a lot. Yes, it's about making a good first impression, but I think at the core, it's really about making sure that you're comfortable and that you're ready and that you feel equipped.
Yeah, I would just add on all great tips. And I feel like everyone's covered really the range here of ways to prepare. And I think what Vanessa was saying in terms of a question, tell me about yourself, just, you're going to get asked that question, right? So be prepared to answer that. And then also be prepared to answer like, why do you want to work here? Or why do you want this job, right? And really, that's your opportunity to really be persuasive as possible. And in terms of just like preparation, like understand like the culture of the company, like what does their website look like? What type of language do they use? Social media is really big, right? In terms of getting a peek into what the company is doing. So that's always a really great way to get a sense of like who works there, what the vibe is, how's the office set up, right? So I think that those are key things to think about. And then also just like the job description, right? Like, can you speak to those points? And I think we'll get into it a little bit more, but really thinking about what the job entails and how have you done that work.
I love this. This is all great. I mean, I'm so hardcore about the preparation because they can tell when you're not prepared. Okay. If you're going into an interview, I mean, this is a commitment. If you were to get hired, we spend what, 70%, something like that, of our time, of our lives at work, and you're not even researching the company or thinking of putting any thought into it. So really hone in the preparation. So to that point, very briefly, what are some ways that you can tell that candidates are not prepared? And feel free to include funny stories because I love funny stories. But are there some specific ways you can tell that a candidate's not prepared?
I had a candidate go to a production company and she was meeting with the owner of the production company. And she asked the candidate, so, I'm assuming you looked at our directors. Was there any directors, that had, that moved you, or was there any work that you liked? And she said, no, I didn't look at any of the directors. I have no idea. And it was such a fail because she was a business development person to being hired to rep this company and their live action directors. So anyway, it was, and you know what, that came back on me, of course, because this woman called me up and said, like, what the heck, you sent this candidate in and she doesn't even know what we do. So, it's kind of it was a lesson for me that I assumed that she was a rep and that she would look at the director's work. But I think that's a good point too. Like for me as an independent recruiter, we try to prep our candidates as much as possible, but they have to do the work. So that was a good lesson for me as well. Always learning.
I think additionally, the quality of the questions that the interviewee asks, I can usually tell if they know what this job is or if they're kind of guessing. Because like sometimes you just like, because I always ask, like, do you have any questions about, for me about the job? Thankfully, like I'm usually either like a second or third round interview as opposed to like the very first one. So most of my individuals that I meet with are a little bit more prepared. But usually when I see like if somebody just is kind of like, no, I don't have any questions, I'm like, you're about to make a little bit of a life-changing decision. You've got no questions about this job. I know how complicated that job is, but do you have it all? Like, okay. Like I actually I'm like, when somebody gives me a really insightful question, I'm always like, that was good. I like that. I like that. So, be thoughtful about the questions that you do prepare, and especially if there's something that gives you insight about what quality of life is like at the at the company. If there's something that maybe isn't the easiest thing to find once you do like a Google search, but it shows that you actually did a little bit of research that's relevant to the role and the company and the job like that it is. Like, I love seeing that, because then I think, oh, this person asks really good questions. Because when I'm working with someone, the troubleshooting process of of actually doing the day-to-day work, I want people to be able to ask good questions, right? So that we can find good answers and work well together. So if you ask a good question, like that's definitely a thumbs up in my book.
Yeah, I would just add, like, at places where I've worked before, like a lot of our work was public. It was a public company, right? So there's tons of articles that are happening, or companies that, like, the work that we're doing is pretty public. And again, like, tons of stuff on social media, right? So if I ask a candidate, like, what do you know about Aspect, right? And they don't have a response. I mean, that's obviously like a lack of preparation, or what excites you about the work that we're doing right now, right? And so being able to answer that, I think, is important. And then just kind of giving very broad, without specifics, responses to questions, right? When, as a recruiter, when we have to like drill down to get that, it just kind of comes across as not being prepared for the conversation.
And since we're on this topic about questions, it's okay to write them down. I feel like a lot of people feel like when they go into interviews, they have to be this superhuman. They have to keep all of the information and questions in their head. They're supposed to know every answer, right, correct? Like, we're all humans. So that's first and foremost, you're human, okay? It's okay to write things down. Pen and paper and be your best friend, okay? So when you're coming up with these questions, to everyone's point, it's okay to write them down and take them to your interview, regardless if it's virtual or in person. Like, you don't even know I have a sticky note down here. So that's the benefit of having a virtual interview. And even if you go in for an in-person interview, it actually looks good if you show up with a notepad and pen. It's okay to write things down. Like, that's totally fine, And the questions, to Jimi's point, you should never, I'm just gonna say, you should never go to an interview and say you don't have questions. You just should never, ever go to an interview, and you should never, ever say that you don't have questions. And what I like to, when I was interviewing, I would come up with 10 questions. Yes, 10, because I was about that life, okay? 10 questions, and then maybe 5 of them were answered during the discussion, and I had 5 more ready to go, okay? And they were about to catch me up, okay? So what I would recommend is just having like 10 to 15 questions. You just never know. I mean, most of that's probably going to answer in the discussion, and then you still have more to ask. Because like Jimi said, this is a commitment, and it's just like dating. Like, you wouldn't date someone just have no questions. That's just strange, right? I mean, I wouldn't. Like, if you're dating someone or entering into a commitment, I would want to know as much as possible so I have a clear picture. So I wanted to drive that point home, because I see that so much where people are like, oh, no, I don't have any questions. And that really doesn't look good if you're looking to commit to a company and spend most of your time there. So thank you so much for bringing that point up. I do want to talk about, before we move on to the next section, do you have some tips to overcome anxiety of interviewing? Because I know it is a thing. Like, people have anxiety. They don't, even outgoing people kind of, get really anxious going into an interview. Do you have any tips or advice for people who really suffer from anxiety when interviewing? Because it's a real thing.
I'll say, I mean, it's not 100%, because sometimes you just kind of got to work through your stuff, but preparation is huge. Like, so all the stuff that we're telling you about, like right now, just like doing your research, having those questions, like prepared, that does do a significant amount of realization of like allowing you to just kind of step outside of it a little bit. When you're underprepared, that's when anxiety like has all the space in the world to multiply and to run away with you. But at the end of the day, I think something that's really important that that it took me a cut. I'm older than I look, but it took me a while to get to this place of understanding that when I'm talking to somebody, I'm actually just talking to another human. Like at the end of the day, the person that's interviewing me is a person, and I'm just having a conversation. We both have a mutual interest. We have a mutual goal, and that is to, to find like the best person, to see if this is a good fit, to do good work. So if you can remember that it's really just a purposeful conversation with another human being, not the person that's got the, gavel on your entire life, like human to human discussion. That's it.
Yeah, I would just say, like, took the words right out of my mouth, Jimmy. Like, I think that that's something that's always helpful to remember, right? Like, as recruiters, we're spending time because we want you to be the right candidate for this role, right? Because if you are, that makes our jobs easier, right? Like, we can stop a search, we can pitch you to the manager, we can sell, Shari is amazing because of X, Y, and Z, right? Like, that's done, right? Like, we found the person. And so that's really important to remember. And I've been on some pretty tough interviews as a candidate, right? And I felt like I was being grilled and I was semi-prepared, right? And that talks about that piece as well. But I think part of it, like, also gave me insight into like the type of culture and like, if I'm being treated like this as a candidate, do I want to be an employee there, right? And so that's something to think about as well as you're going through this process.
Yeah, and just to add a couple of things, and back to Shari's point, me, myself, I make a list. Like, this is my notebook, my things to do list. So it is perfectly normal in, quote unquote, corporate America that people still make a checklist. So if you go into your interview and you have things written down, that is okay. Hey, keep it right in front of you if it's going to be a Zoom interview. And obviously you want to keep eye contact with the person you're talking to. But if you need to look down for whatever reason to be like, oh my gosh, there was something so important that I wrote down and I wanted to say, reference it, like bring it up in the conversation. And then at the very end, depending on how much time you have, if the interviewer asks you, hey, what questions do you have? Say, I actually have a couple, I wrote them down. It's okay to say things like that because, again, it's a normal thing to have that conversation in the interview process. You don't have to be this perfect person that would keep everything in your head. And I would also recommend that you either grab a friend or your mom or somebody that you can get the nerves out with. Have a practice interview with somebody. Because if you're the type of person where you have that anxiety, the nerves are going to come out, you're going to sound shaky. You got to get the scaries out beforehand. You really have to work through that. And the best way to work through it is to like grab a buddy and to just be like, hey, be my interviewer, ask me questions, and I'm going to answer to the best of my ability, acting as if it was the interview. So that way, like, you can get some honest feedback and then you yourself can get a gut check. Like, okay, how did I sound? Even record yourself. So that way you're like, oh man, like I really got to slow down. I got to calm down and breathe through this.
And this should all be happening. Just a tip, you have enough to worry about the day of the interview. If you can, this should all be happening the day before. Write down your questions, poke around the website, spend some time with yourself and figure out, why do I want to work here? Write it all down. So that way, when you wake up the next day, all you have to worry about is showing up for your interview. Like, don't make life harder for yourself, waking up, having to prepare the day of and think of questions and do all this on the same day. So this should all be happening the night before. These are all such great tips. And just remember, like, I think Jimmy said it, like, we're just human. You're not on trial. I always say we're not on trial for murder. We're just having a conversation. This is not an interrogation. It's literally just a conversation. And all of us that are interviewing you, we had to interview to get our current jobs. So think of it like that. Like, everyone has to interview. So this is not foreign territory. We're not bots. We're just having a conversation to figure out if it's a fit for you and if it's a fit for the company. It's a two-way street. And so it's all about perspective, which is why I think this is so important. Like, you could choose to look at it as this daunting, scary experience, or you can choose to look at it as a constructive experience where you're just trying to figure out if this is a company you want to work with, if you're vibing with the culture, get your questions answered, et cetera. So it all starts with the mind. It all starts with perspective. So most of the people on this call or the attendees today might be entry level, or maybe they're looking to level up in their careers. So is there ways that they can still stand out? Because I think it's this negative connotation that if you don't have 35 plus years of experience and you have nothing to bring to the table, and that's simply not true. So can we just talk about, if you're an entry-level college student, or maybe you don't have a lot of experience in the role that you're applying for or interested in, are there still ways that you could stand out? What are some of the things outside of experience that recruiters look for?
I could start with that. My daughter's a junior in college and studying advertising. So I've spoken to quite a few of her friends about resumes and this kind of thing in interviews. And I feel like even if you don't have a lot of experience, or you don't have, a really deep resume, I think it's really important to talk about what your brand is, what your side hustle is, what makes you, what you're passionate about. Like, I had one of her classmates, and, she was really smart and she had this perfect little resume. And I said, but who are you beyond this resume? Like, who is Olivia? And I found out she has like a massive, she collects socks, and she has this intense, like, museum level collection of socks. She was an equestrian rider in high school, like just things that help get the person to understand who you are beyond that piece of paper, like who you are as a human, what turns you on, what lights you up in the world. Because I think especially entry level, that's the best way for people to understand who you are. You can say a lot of things, but as soon as you start talking about your passions, or you've demonstrated what else you have on the side, or what else, moves you, I think that helps a lot, especially for entry level people coming into the business.
Yeah, I think that part of, and this can seem a little bit daunting, if you is networking, right? Like setting up time to have conversations with people about the types of jobs they're doing, right? So if you want to be an assistant, do you have friends that are assistants? Do you know someone who's an assistant? Know someone of someone, right? And just take time to connect with them, to really think through the work that they're doing, what types of experiences they've had, so you can kind of get a sense of, what their path was. I think that like graduating right out of college, that's something that I was pretty nervous about, but I knew that I had to like put myself out there, even though it's going to be nerve-wracking, and I probably did a terrible job at it, but I still was checking those boxes, doing those things, right? So I think that that's really important. And then on that similar note, in terms of networking, if you have the time, some volunteer work in some organizations that you're passionate about, you never know who you'll meet through those kind of avenues. And so I think that like really relying on the people that you know, if you don't necessarily have the experience, is a really great way to find a path.
I think that's absolutely perfect as far as like, if there's somebody that that has done the job, or even if it's not somebody that you guys, if you're on LinkedIn or whatever, and they do the job that you're trying to get to, ask them questions. I used to do it all the time. There have been times where I've gone for a job that I've never done anything before. Like I've never done that job before, but I knew that I had some transferable skills or something that was applicable, right? I was like, okay, the two skills, like I still say it to this day that I only have two skills. I'm not even gonna lie. It's just, I know how to communicate and I know how to be organized. It just so happens that those tend to be core skills for almost every job, right? I can break everything down to its simplest parts. And like, I'm gonna organize it, and I'm gonna communicate with comfort and authority, whatever. So if you when you know that, if I needed to know specifics about a job, I'd find somebody that was doing that job and I'd just pick their brain. And half the time, people love sharing their experiences and how they've gotten to where they've gotten to. So you shouldn't really be afraid at all to ping somebody and be like, hey, I see that you've done this or that you do this. I'd love to pick your brain about this. I'm trying to get a job in this space. Do you have a few minutes for me to be able to just ask you questions? And then you do it, right? And then you're prepared when you go in, to actually meeting and talking to somebody. I think the other thing, as far as if you don't have a ton of experience, I think you need to do a quick just review of your life, because all experience is applicable. Okay. So it doesn't mean that you had to be paid for it to know that, to be able to say or to tie that into the conversation. You can be like, well, in school, I was part of like student council, or in this, like I was part of this volunteer organization, or, like my parents owned, like a shop, and I used to come in and help organize this or keep the, schedule of whatever. Like all of those things you might think is because I haven't held this job before, but there are transferable like experiences and skills that you might have just learned in just your day to day that you can, bring to the forefront. And remember, like if you actually got the interview already and you're to the point where you're actually talking to somebody, they already saw something that they were like in you, that they were like, let me see what this is about. So that's another way to also kind of like remove some of the anxiety, because if you got to that point, they're already interested to some degree, right? So just bring all of that to the forefront whenever you can.
Thank you, Jimmy, for bringing. Oh, go ahead, Vanessa. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add one last quick point. I mean, I know we've talked a lot about, being prepared, but sometimes, especially for most people here that may be going for that first entry level job or that internship where you're like, how do I get prepared when I've never done this job before? Or I have no idea what I'm jumping into. And I want to be mindful of that too. And I think, again, I'm so glad, Jimmy, you brought that up about transferable skills, because in your current part-time job or whatever it is that you're a part of now, there is something transferable, meaning whether it's your people skills, your adaptability, your time management, your willingness to go above and beyond to help people. Those are what are considered transferable skills that you can take into that job that you're interviewing for. And you should really think about examples of what that means to you and how you've done those things, and then share that in your interview.
And I'll piggyback even more because I'm a transferable skills ambassador, okay? Every single panel I do, I talk about transferable skills because it's so important that you still understand that there's still a place for you, even if you don't have a ton of experience. Recruiters look at everything from experience to soft skills, your your extracurricular activities, your volunteer. So I don't want you to feel defeated or debilitated just because you've never worked in that particular role or industry. It means that you're not qualified. Still apply anyway. You never know what they're looking for. You have no idea what that recruiter or what that company is looking for. And you really sell yourself short if you say, oh, I don't have experience, so I'm just not gonna apply. So just to reiterate, transferable skills, like Vanessa said and Jimmy, they apply to every industry. So that's what transferable skills are. Every industry wants people who are good at customer service. Every industry wants people who can work on a team as well as independently. Everybody wants a self-start, like these things, people who can adapt easily. So Google is the homie. I'm gonna get a t-shirt made because Google is the homie. Use Google for resources, your best friend. Like Google what transferable skills are, and then spend some time with yourself. Because when you're interviewing on a job search, you should be really spending some time with yourself to figure out what's my why, what do I want to do next, what do I want in my next role, but also make a list of everything that you bring to the table. I always tell talent this, make a list and don't be modest, just freehand a list of your strengths, what you bring to the table, what you love about yourself, why you would be an asset. And then from that list, you can talk more comfortably in your interviews and even on your resume about your assets and what you bring to the table. So transferable skills is so, so important, especially for entry-level students or people who are looking to break into the industry, okay? I wanna touch on one last thing before we get into questions. I wanna talk about like virtual interviews are new normal, if you will, whatever that means, but a lot of people are adapting to virtual interviews. And I wanna talk about, is the production of the interview or the aesthetic of the interview important, like lighting, connectivity issues? Like what are some things people should be mindful of? Because I've seen it all, let me tell you. What are some things that they should really be mindful of when you're interviewing virtually? I really want to spend a little bit of time on this.
I'll go first. That's a really, really great question, because I feel like virtual interviewing is here to stay for a lot of companies that are going to stay remote and hire a remote workforce. Please, you guys, do your due diligence. Make sure that at the very least, your Wi-Fi and your connectivity is like good to go for that first interview. It's so important. It will really, it'll disenchant your interviewer if they can't hear you, if the audio isn't great, or if there's a constant disconnection. So first and foremost, make sure that you're set up ready to go with that. And depending on where you are, make sure there's, very limited noise. don't take an interview if your bed is literally right directly behind you and it's completely a mess, it's unmade. Just little etiquette, it's the small details, but it's the etiquette that still matters on the interview. Like obviously right now my background is blurred, but I'm in my apartment. But if I had like a pile of clothes behind me, it probably doesn't look good.
It's distracting. You don't want anything distracting.
Yeah, I think that I think virtual interviews is, I think I'll get to that, but I think even on like phone interviews still, right? Like that still is kind of a go-to in terms of like my initial first step with candidates is a phone conversation, and make sure that you're taking those in a room, right? Or somewhere that there aren't any distractions. I've been on conversations with candidates where you can tell they're in the middle of going from one place to another, right? And that doesn't, I mean, it just makes me feel like you're not prioritizing this conversation or interest in this job, right? So it feels like a waste of my time. I think that's key. I think in terms of like the virtual interview piece, I think the setup, what Vanessa mentioned, all that is lighting, I think can also play a part, right? Making sure that the person can see you. I was recently on a virtual interview where a candidate was just staring down the entire time while they were talking to us, and we were just left wondering, what are they looking at, right? Like, so I think that, getting good eye contact in terms of the camera, whether you're looking directly at the camera, at yourself on the screen, I think that that's a good tip to just kind of know where your eyes are at.
Yeah, I think also like all of the points that I just said are absolutely true. I think, additionally to that, I'm going to say this because it was really funny to me, but I had an interview once where the person really didn't know what their frame looked like. And so the entire interview, they were like this, and I'm not joking. And I was like, I had to keep a straight face during like the entire thing. And because I was just like, do they really not know that that's what's going on? Okay, maybe they're having some technical difficulty. I don't know. They didn't get the job. But it's just like, I think you gotta be kind of like mindful of like just the way that you're presenting. I think it's really important to also recognize, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize this about how much communication is nonverbal, how much of how you get to understand about a person. I think it's something like 90% almost of like communication is actually nonverbal, right? So it's like, not just the words that you say, but it's also like how present you feel, it's your body language. Because if I'm like this the whole interview, I'm going to think you're not interested. I'm going to think that you're not taking this seriously. I'm be like, I'm sorry to interrupt your nap time. I didn't mean to. Is it, you good? Right? Like that's where I'm going to go. So I'm going to be like, yeah, let's just make sure that I don't have distractions, and I'm not easily like, oh, what's going on over there or whatever. And I think it was Vanessa that said it earlier too. This is also where saying what's happening off screen can be very helpful. Like that's part of like owning an interview as well. Like, so if there is something that's distracting you, as opposed to you just being like, ugh, and trying to act like it's not happening, you'd be like, I'm sorry, like there's something happening outside my window just like right now. So I really apologize for that, like for that going on. So if I look over a couple of times, I'm just trying to make sure that everything's okay. Okay. Just wanted to be sure. Or I'm writing my, like notes. So I'm just off camera, like, because that person doesn't know that you're, like that you're doing it. And we're just like sitting there thinking and not necessarily listening, because again, humans, we're like thinking like, what is happening that I cannot see, right? So it's that I think that's one of the ways to also be able to adapt to life happening like around us in these types of situations when there is a camera available.
Yeah, and like Vanessa said, and Shari said, try your camera out, like try it out the night before, try it out that day, get a friend just to say, hey, how do I look? What's, because you can look at yourself and think it looks good, but have somebody check you out in preparation.
All good nuggets. Okay, so I do want to spend some time on the actual questions that will be asked in an interview, because as we know, we don't know what questions a given company is going to ask. So I just picked the most common, dreadful ones, so I can make sure that you're most prepared. So I'm going to just start with the tell me about yourself question. It's so simple, but I'm telling you, everybody dreads it. You're not alone, okay? It's a very difficult question to ask because it has to be so concise. But do you have any tips on how to answer that question in a way where you're not rambling and you're not talking about like your entire biography in an interview? Like, what are some tips and tricks to answer that question to make sure that you answer it effectively and concisely?
I think the quickest thing is just to make sure that whatever you say is relevant to like the role or your performance, like in it. So it's not about like I was, born on a quiet night in the 2nd of October, right? Like that's not the thing that we're trying to get to when we're like, tell us about yourself. It's just like, I come from a very, kind of like industrial family. So work has, like but both of my parents were business owners. So that's something that I feel like is relevant, especially if the job is related to understanding something that is, being able to understand like day-to-day management of work or prioritization or like, so if whatever you're telling about yourself, make sure that it's like relevant to the performance, of the job. It's where in your history that you've gained experience that's relevant to the performance of, like your job, not necessarily that pizza is your favorite food, stuff like that.
Yeah, I tend to get really just, I think that like my kind of go-to format is this is what I'm doing now, this is who I am in this moment in time, and then just go back chronologically in terms of the relevant pieces. And I did this before. Again, it's a combination of things. You got to think about like what the job that you're applying for is and how is it related to the work that you've done in the past, and really tying that in. And ultimately, like in that same way, showing your enthusiasm and excitement for the company and the role. I think that those are things that are really good to just kind of include in your first like minute, 90-second intro.
So always keep it relevant. It should always tie into the role, okay? I want to talk about behavioral questions. If you don't know what a behavioral question is tell me about a time when ... The questions we all love, right? No, we don't. So how do you answer those? First of all, why do they ask those questions? Why do you ask behavioral questions? And what's the best way to answer them? Again, I'm trying to minimize rambling because when they ask you to tell me about a time, our minds go way back and we're already nervous and we already have to think about a lot of things already. So is there some tips and tricks to answer behavioral questions, and what are they and why do you ask them? I know that's a lot. So why do companies ask behavioral questions? What are behavioral questions and how do you answer them?
I can kind of jump into that. And it goes back to what we were talking about, transferable skills. So a transferable skill, for again, just trying to breaking it down to give very real examples for you guys is, if you go above and beyond in your current job or a club or something that you're a part of, think about an example of how you've done that, right? Think about a specific project or an instance where you're like, hey, I took the reins, I led this, I did that. And that's how you can take that example into the interview with you when somebody asks you about a behavioral question. It's really just sharing an example of your own personal behavior, like how you did, what was your contribution, what did you help implement, how did you navigate through it, were there any challenges? Like you really have to draw that experience in and then kind of practice articulating that through your answer.
Yeah, I think part of it really with behavioral questions is to get insight into the work that you've done in the past. How did you handle that situation? Like, what did you do? What were the results, right? And so really being able to paint a picture. And I think part of it is just telling a story, right? Like you got to make someone engage in what you're saying. Like one of my go-tos is always like, tell me about a time when you found a more efficient way to complete one of your job responsibilities or a faster way, right? And so I think we can all think of things when we've developed shortcuts in our jobs or found like, I actually don't need to do steps 5 through 10 because of the way that I did them through just repetition, right? And so really being able to talk through those pieces, like what happened and why did it happen? Why did you change the way it needed to be done? And what was the result of that? I think that that's kind of what I want to hear from candidates when they talk about their experience.
And also I'll add to that, because if you don't know, I like to talk, if you haven't noticed. And so when I first started interviewing, oh my God, I was the worst rambler. Oh my gosh, like I would ramble to the end of my days. And then someone told me about the STAR method. If you've never heard of the STAR method, it's a great way to answer behavioral questions to keep you on task. So basically the STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result, to Hugo's point. So just name the situation, name what the task was at hand, what you did, and what was the outcome. So situation, task, action, result, and keep it moving, okay? Because I don't know what I was talking about, but I was like 7 minutes later, I forgot the question. So that is for my ramblers out there, that is a game changer. So the STAR method. So I know earlier in the conversation, we were talking about questions to ask the employer. I wanna revisit that for a minute because you should always go into an interview with questions. We already notated that. So to that point, what are some examples of great questions that recruiters like? Like to Jimi's point, like impressive questions really like puts you in a great light. So can you think of maybe 2 or 3 great questions? So get your notepads out. Can you think of 2 to 3 great questions to ask a company or an employer? And before you do that, obviously, I know I said Google is a homie, which it is, but you should be asking questions that you genuinely want to know the answer to, like you actually want to know the answer to. But can we get some concrete examples? Because I want to make sure that everyone listening, you give them some ideas of things that they can ask in their next interview.
I like a question, questions like where someone asks about what does a day in the life of this role look like, right? Because like for me, that's just like telling her like I now understand that someone is actually trying to see what like how they would fit into this space. So if they haven't asked you that, it's just kind of like, or if it's not on the job description, is like, what would a typical day working in this role at this company look like for me? Like, I love that question.
Yeah, I think part of that too, I really like when candidates are really interested in like what the onboarding process will look like, right? Like, so either it's like 30, 60, 90 days during that period of time, what do you expect to get, right? And I think part of it too, in terms of like tailoring the types of questions that you're going to ask, right? I would just be mindful in terms of like what you're asking a recruiter, right? So someone who's that first line of like screening candidates, whether or not this is a fit or not. And then when you get to the second or third round, someone who's going to be your manager, right? They're going to more intimately know what the day-to-day is like, what that looks like. So being able to have different types of questions, right? For those 2 different populations, I think is important. So there's that a bit of a distinction.
I would also add, it's super important that as part of your preparation leading into that interview, read the job description again and again. Don't assume that you know the role. And again, there's more to the position beyond what the job description even might say, but it's at least the best baseline that you have to say, okay, this is what I'm walking into. I see what's on paper. I'm reading through the job responsibilities, the must-haves, and maybe even frame some questions based off of, hey, I noticed that on the job description, it said that this person would be responsible for XYZ. Would love to know a little bit more about that. Or again, it just tells the interviewer that you've paid attention, you're curious, you're interested to know more. Or you could even use that as a way to say, I noticed that the responsibility said this. I've done something similar in my job now.
All good. Thank you so much for answering that.
I think I would just reminded me about one thing was like, going back to the preparation piece, right? So questions of if you looked at someone's LinkedIn, right, and something that really caught your eye, bring that up, right? Because it kind of helps tie that point that you've researched this person. And also feel free to like share things that weren't asked, right? Like you use that space for yourself as well. If there's something that really you're passionate about that makes sense to the conversation, bring that up.
So I still got one more. All right. So I also like when people ask, what do you enjoy most about working here? So that you get a little bit of an understanding about the culture of the company and why that person that you're talking to really enjoys, what they love most about their job. And then there's also one that I learned a long time ago that I have used in every interview, but it is, do you have any concerns or questions about my ability to do this job that I might not have been able to address throughout the rest of throughout this interview or the course of the interview? Because it's something about it that specifically triggers that hiring manager's brain into thinking about, okay, is this person good? Or you know what, there was one concern. Let me actually offer that up to you right now. And then you've got an opportunity like that you wouldn't have ever had before to actually be able to say, I'm so glad that you asked that. Okay, so here's where, let me tell you about an example of this is what I've done in those types of situations. It might provide you with a scenario that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise, or you didn't even know that they were even thinking. And it also might trigger them into thinking about like putting into words something they might have felt a little bit like at unrest about. So I really like that question too.
That's really good. I mean, at the end of the day, like I said before, questions are less of protocol and more so you have a crystal clear picture as to what the role entails and the company culture when you leave the interview. There's no reason you should leave the interview still confused as to what the role entails or what the company culture is like, because that's the whole purpose of questions. And recruiters love questions, okay? So before I ask my last question, I'm going to open the floor for questions for the panelists. Please DM me or please PM me directly with your question. If you don't PM me directly, I will not get to it. So if you have a question, PM me directly with your question. I will ask it for the sake of time for these last 15 minutes. You can do that right now. So my last question is about follow-up. So the interview's over, you've done the interview, you're like, yeah, I aced it. What now? Like, how soon do you follow up? How do you follow up? What do you say? Like, can we just talk about that to make sure we're following up efficiently? And just know you should always, always, always follow up. Always. And if you're a person like me that has a lot going on, iPhone has this great feature called alarms. I'm the alarm queen. Anybody who knows me, I have 1 trillion alarms per day. And just a little tip, Shari's tip number 8:58, okay? When you have an interview, let's say your interview's at 1, I will set an alarm for like 4, saying, don't forget to send thank you note. That's just a little tip. I'm gonna let y'all in on my golden secrets, okay? So just a few hours after your interview, set an alarm or reminder or post it or however you remind yourself to do things, because you don't wanna forget that really important piece of following up. So again, my question was, how soon do you follow up? How do you follow up? Email, mail, is there other ways we don't know about? And then what do you say?
Hey, Shari, can I just answer one more thing? Because Jimi inspired a thought.
Yes,
one more thing from the question before is, when you're interviewing and you're getting ready to leave and you do feel like you've nailed that interview, make sure you express or somehow communicate that you really want this job. And it's not in a weird way, but it's like, I've had tons of people that called up and said, they were great, but they just don't be too cool for school. Like, people get to this place where they feel like they're not asking for the job, or they're not saying, I think I'd be really good at this. Like after what Jimi said is, is there anything that I've said that makes you feel like I might not be right? Leave it on I really, really enjoyed speaking to you and I really hope this works out because I think I could do a terrific job, or something with conviction that makes you feel like, so that you don't leave and they're like, I don't even know if they really want this job. So that's happened quite a few times. And I think that's really important. And then, we go into the follow-up. I have one story that there was one candidate that brought thank you notes. And this is when they interviewed in person, but they brought a thank you note. They wrote the thank you note. They left it at the receptionist before they left the office. And it had such an amazing impact. So those thank you notes, those follow-ups are incredibly important. To thanking somebody for their time for your interview is super, super important, and in a timely manner, like your alarms.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it goes without saying that you need to send just the thank you note for that time, right? I think that it's a really great habit to, practice, and it lands very differently with different people, right? Like some people aren't necessarily checking for someone sending a thank you note. It becomes very transactional, but there's quite a few like hiring managers who really feel that candidates should send a thank you note because of how much time they spent with them, right? So I think just always err on the side of sending a thank you note. I think you definitely want to do it at least within 24 hours of the conversation, maybe by end of day. So that would be my metric. And then include things that really excited you, things that you both chatted about that really stuck out to you, right? If you're doing a Zoom interview, you're taking down notes, just maybe a line that really stuck out or something that excited you about the position, just including that. And then if you meet with multiple people, make sure that like you're sending a personalized note to each of those people, right? Because it's likely that they'll share the notes with each other. And if you don't have everyone's email, make sure that whoever coordinated your interview, you can feel free to like send them that note and just ask them to forward it along. So there's a couple of different things that I would recommend.
I want to just kind of like add to that too is, sometimes people want to find like if they don't have direct access to the interviewer's email, like the hiring manager or whatever. Some companies, depending on the size, you might only have coordinated just with the recruiter as opposed to like to the person. I would say follow the protocol, is like go with the person that you've connected with, or that you have whose email address that you actually have access to. I know some people want to be like truly ambitious, and then like they'll find the contact information or they'll guess the contact information. If that person hasn't provided it to you, I would say send it to the recruiter and have that recruiter, like forward it along, because they actually will, like it will get to the right person. Don't be like worried, because sometimes it might rub some people like the wrong way if you go a little too far in your own investigation, being like, I don't remember giving them my email. Why are they spamming? Like just put whoever's email address you have, you can send the follow-up there.
And I would just add, like, in terms of the timeliness of it, right? You don't want to fall into a scenario where you forget to send a thank you note, then a week later you're sending a thank you note with and when will I hear back, right? Like that just kind of doesn't land well.
Set those alarms. I'm telling you, so it's a game changer, those alarms. Okay, so we do have about 10 or so minutes for questions. Before I do, if the panelists, I'm all about resources. I always end my panels like this. If the panelists have any resources or job boards or forums or internship sites or any tangible resources that the attendees can tap into in their job search, can you drop it in the chat, please? We always want to make sure that the attendees are leaving with resources or just things that they should know, articles you've read, but most importantly, that's the question I always get is, where do I find jobs? Like, where do I find work? So outside of your company site, if you know of any interesting job forums you've come across, websites or anything like that they should know about, if you could drop it in the chat, that would be super helpful. Okay, let's get into these questions. For the sake of time, 1 to 2 responses from the panelists, please, brief, please, so we can get through as many as possible. First question is about being overqualified. Getting the interview in the first place is a struggle. For context, I seem to be caught in the feedback loop of being overqualified for entry-level roles. How do I get out of this, basically? That you're overqualified for this role, but they want an entry-level role.
I think start with making sure that you're customizing your resume first to the job that you're applying for. So, make sure that what you're showing is absolutely just relevant to the particular job, highlighting just the specific needs or responsibilities that's there. But I think if there's a reason why you're shifting careers or going into something that you're transparent about that. You're like, I'm looking to start somewhere new, and I understand that that this is starting a little bit lower than what I've done in the past, but I'm really ready for that. Like, I need to make this change, or I really am interested in this particular field or this industry, right? So it's a combination of being able to really weave your own narrative when you're having that discussion. Usually, just so that I think on the business side of what overqualified people get concerned about when they think that you're overqualified, they think that you're not going to be satisfied with the role, and they think that you're going to want to move out of that role really, really quickly, and that as a business they have a need for that role to be filled. So if you understand that and in your responses, I think you can kind of tailor your response accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's great. Definitely make sure that your resume aligns there. I think I would also then do a bit of the networking piece, right? Making sure that people know. And I feel like maybe a dying art form, but the cover letter is also helpful and really conveying a little bit more of why you're making that change, right? And so that's what I would suggest.
That's a good point, Hugo. Thank you, Jimmy and Hugo, for answering. Next question. If you are a college student applying for entry-level roles, should I bring up experiences from high school in an interview, even though it's from years ago, or should I focus only on recent experience?
I think if you have enough recent relevant experience, that's really what you should focus on, especially given the limited time you may have in the interview. Most of the time it will be just 30 minutes. So if you think you have enough to cover in your relevant recent experience, I'd say start there. And then if you want to draw back from previous experience from years before, to me, in my opinion, as a recruiter myself, I think that's appropriate.
Thank you. Hugo touched on this earlier, but I think it's worth revisiting. What is the best way to network? Through LinkedIn, email, other resources, social media? Because networking is a big part of this industry.
I think you got to start with, right, who do you know? Really start thinking about, I'm a huge pen and paper person. So I just start thinking about what types of work, what types of companies do I want to go after? Who do I know there? LinkedIn's a really great way to do that mapping. I meant to say this earlier, but I think I may have alluded to it, but I always like to see in terms of what job do I want in the future? So I will search those types of positions and look at the path that people took to get there, just because I think you got to be able to see it to believe it. And so that's always helpful for me. But again, start with everyone that you do know, and who knows who, right? And can someone make an introduction for you?
And I think from a creative recruiter standpoint, if you're looking at an agency that you'd like to work at creatively, you look at their Instagrams, look at their again, that side work, look at their Instagrams, look at what artists, because when you're applying as a creative, like a writer or an art director, they're going to want to know what your taste is, what your taste is in that. I've had, even producers at an editorial shop, I've had a request for a producer that is passionate about music. What's their, what music do they like? So on the creative side, I think there's a lot of social channels that you can look at and kind of reach out to of people that are doing what you'd like to do beyond LinkedIn. LinkedIn's always a good place to start, but I also feel like if you're in that, that artist or visual effects or photography or writer or art director, there's a lot of social channels you can look at as well to look at people and try to make connections there. I
know we're short for time, but this one is super important to me. So people, when you're trying to network, like I think asking them questions about their experience, like connecting, like I said a little bit earlier, like wanting to pick their brain is I feel like a better introduction than saying, hey, I want a job. What can you do for me? Right? Because we get that all the time, and so then that in my mind, you go into kind of like a folder, and I'm kind of in my automatic response mode of like, oh great, yeah, send me your resume, but I'm not remembering you. But if I'm having an actual interaction with you as a human, I'm going to remember you more, because people really like to work with people that they know. And if you can make that memory, then when you do apply later, and you're just not asking me for the favor, then I'm going to think, oh yeah, I remember this person, and I really had a great experience with them, I like them. Let me see what they're asking for. So that I had to say that. Goodbye.
And I'm going to say there's a motorcycle outside if you hear some rumbling. So I'm taking a note from Jimi. Okay, so don't mind the motorcycle. Okay, so the next question is talking about when a recruiter asks them to walk through their resume, they find themselves rambling or ranting because they don't really know how to answer that. So when a recruiter asks, walk me through your resume, what are they really asking, and how do you answer that question? I actually got that question twice. What does the walk me through your resume mean?
That's a really good question. It's basically a quick recap of your experience. Walking through your resume means, let's start with your education, what school you're going to, why you were interested in your major, things like that. Like short, sweet, to the point is always good. And then go into your work history, like what led you to your first job, and then how'd you pivot, what led you into that second job. Again, like, you shouldn't spend or go into a long-winded tangent about every single thing, but it's just more about like, just bring me up to speed with where you were and where you're at today.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, a few more. Next question is, what is a good timeline in terms of following up post-interview? Is a week the general rule? So basically after you had the interview, when should you follow up again if you haven't heard anything?
Oh, I'll jump in again on that one. Immediate follow-up, I always say as a rule of thumb, before you forget, send the recruiter a thank you email right away and just get that off your plate. And then as far as a follow-up, I mean, it really just depends on the urgency of filling the position, or if it's very early in the recruitment search. Sometimes the recruiter will be honest and tell you, hey, we just opened the position, or we're in the early stages of interviews, and that should be your cue that it may take a while, maybe another month or so before they're ready to narrow things down, make some final decisions. So I usually say, give it maybe a week or two. It's great to be eager and interested, but you also don't want to flood them too soon with inquiries or updates. You gotta remember that the recruiter is a human too, and they probably have a ton on their plate, and hopefully, you can hold them accountable to get back to you, and that they will get back to you in a timely manner.
Yeah, part of it I think includes, like, as you're finishing up that interview, is asking about next steps and when can you expect to hear back, right? So don't assume that the recruiter is going to tell you what that is. Make sure that you're asking that as part of your questions.
Thank you both. So before I ask this next question, I know we touched on LinkedIn. If you don't have a LinkedIn on this call, get one. You are missing out. There's no reason why anyone on this call should not have a LinkedIn. That's where you network. That's where you learn about opportunities. And I know a lot of people think LinkedIn is for older people. It is not. It's changing. Okay, so if you're on this call and you don't have a LinkedIn, this is your sign to get one. And if you're on this call and you haven't updated your LinkedIn, and God knows when, this is your sign to update your LinkedIn, okay? It should be a living, breathing profile that you update with all the new happenings of your career trajectory and your academics, okay? So
the LinkedIn should match your resume. You shouldn't have, because otherwise you send a resume and they don't match up. Sometimes a resume gets sent around internally. Sometimes people that are looking at you as a hire will just pull up the LinkedIn profile. So make sure they mirror each other and are both up to date and have the same information.
Thank you. That's a really good point.
And your email and your email address. So many LinkedIn profiles. If you're open for a job and there's no way to contact you except through LinkedIn, you might want to add, if you're putting that open for work icon, you might want to add your email. So it takes that step out of the recruiter then having to email you on LinkedIn and then saying, can I get your email? And then having them email back, and just make the information as available as possible.
Yes, and they have an open, if you don't know, an open to work tab that goes on your profile that shows that you're available for work. That's another great aspect of LinkedIn as well. So this question is asking, if you just interviewed with the CEO or whoever you interviewed with, is it unprofessional to request them on LinkedIn, or how soon should you wait to do that?
I say before or after the interview, actually. Right before I've interviewed candidates, I already start to see their connection requests come through on LinkedIn, or right after that too. So I think it's definitely appropriate.
I agree.
I don't mind it.
Heard it here first. They don't mind it. Okay, a couple more questions. This one's really good. If you unfortunately do not get the job, is it ever okay to reach out and ask if there was anything they could have done better or anything specific that they can work on? Is that professional or okay?
I think it's okay to ask. Some companies are going to be hesitant to give that feedback just because of various reasons, potential litigation, whatever the case is, right? There's so many factors that go into that. It's okay to ask, I think. I've been in certain situations where I don't feel comfortable to give feedback. So it's just a matter of the connection and the relationship that you establish with the recruiter.
And I would frame it like that. I'd say, do you have any feedback from me that, that might be helpful for me, right? Like, and to the recruiter that you've had the most communication with, not necessarily to the hiring manager, but to that recruiter, I would say yes.
Perfect. And that was the last question. Thank you so much to our panelists. Before we wrap, I just want to reiterate, closed mouths don't get fed. That's another one of my Shari-isms, okay? So the worst thing that can happen is they don't feel comfortable giving the feedback, or they just don't respond. That's the very worst that could happen, and it didn't kill you, okay? But it doesn't hurt to ask. It doesn't hurt to apply for the job, to get the interview in the first place. We talked about transferable skills. We talked about soft skills. Do not sell yourself short, okay? You never know what the employer or the recruiter is looking for, and closed mouths don't get fed. So put yourself out there. You got to put yourself out there and take risks. That's very, very important in your job search and when you're interviewing. I just want to thank each Jimi, Vanessa, Hugo, Andrea. I love these people, okay? I'm so happy that you carved out time to speak to the students, alum, and everybody in attendance. It was incredibly resourceful. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. I appreciate you taking the time today. Like I said before, Pipelines and the CSU EA, we do this about once every 3 weeks. So make sure you're tuned in with Pipelines, you're tuned in with the CSU EA so you don't miss another session. We try and focus on a different area of entertainment and creative every session to make sure that you're getting a well-rounded aspect into what this wonderful industry entails. There's a place for everybody in this industry, regardless of what you bring to the table, okay? So we are here as viable resources for you. You've met 4 new people today to add to your network, so there's no reason why you can't say that the networking opportunities aren't there. Thank you so much for investing in your future and your job search by being here today, and go out there and kill it. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of the weekend. Thank you.